In the merciless expanse of the American frontier, where law bends to the will of the ruthless, an old tracker named James Blackwood lived a quiet life with his most unusual family, a pack of trained wolves. For years, the locals whispered about the mysterious rancher who could command these fierce predators like they were his own blood. But the Hawkins gang, notorious outlaws fresh off a string of brutal raids, saw his peaceful ranch as just another easy target. They came at midnight, torches blazing, thinking they'd found themselves a helpless victim. Instead, they ignited something far more dangerous than any fire. They awakened the hunter in a man who'd spent decades teaching wolves the art of the kill. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn painted the Montana sky in shades of amber and gold as James Blackwood emerged from his modest cabin, his weathered boots crunching against the frost-covered grass. At 53, his face bore the marks of a life spent in the wilderness. Undige deep lines etched by sun and wind, and eyes that had seen more than most men could bear. But there was something else in those eyes, a fierce intelligence that spoke of years spent reading both man and beast. A low growl rumbled from the tree, line followed by the padding of heavy paws. Shadow, the alpha of his pack, emerged first, a massive black wolf with eyes like polished silver. Behind him, 5 more wolves materialized from the morning mist, moving with the precise coordination that had taken Blackwood years to instill. "At ease," Blackwood commanded softly, and the tension in their muscles instantly relaxed. He reached into his coat and pulled out strips of dried venison, tossing them with practiced accuracy to each wolf in order of their rank. This wasn't just feeding time. It was a daily ritual that reinforced the pack's hierarchy and their bond with him. 15 years had passed since he'd found Shadow, then a half-starved pup in the aftermath of a particularly brutal winter. That same year, his wife Sarah had passed, leaving him alone with nothing but tracks to follow and a void that seemed impossible to fill. But in saving Shadow, he'd found a new purpose. As he moved through his morning routine, checking the fences, tending to his small herd of cattle, the wolves moved with him in a complex dance they'd perfected over the years. Ghost and Storm, the twin greys, always took the flanks. Timber, the russet-colored female, watched the rear. Luna, the youngest, stayed close to Shadow, while Thunder, the largest of the males, ranged ahead, scouting. Blackwood had learned their language just as they'd learned his commands. Every ear twitch, every tail position, every subtle change in their gait told him stories about what was happening in his territory. They were more than just trained animals. They were extensions of his will, a family forged in solidarity and survival. In town, they called him the Wolf Whisperer behind his back, their voices mixing fear with fascination. Few knew the truth of how he'd gained such mastery. Fewer still knew of his years as a frontier tracker, when his ability to read sign and predict human behavior had made him legendary among the territory's lawmen. "Movement to the south," he murmured, noting Shadow's sudden attention. The alpha's ears had pricked forward, his posture alerting the others. Blackwood reached for his spyglass, scanning the distant ridge where the wolves' attention was focused. A lone rider moving fast, too fast for these treacherous paths. Within moments, the pack had shifted formation without a single verbal command. This was the result of countless hours of training, years of building trust and understanding. Each wolf knew its role, understood the subtle signals that could mean the difference between life and death in the unforgiving wilderness. The rider was getting closer, and now Blackwood could see the urgency in their posture. News was coming, and in his experience, news that arrived with such haste rarely brought anything good. His hand instinctively moved to the well-worn Colt at his hip, a habit formed from years of tracking the territory's most dangerous outlaws. Wolves sensed his tension, their bodies coiling like springs. With a single gesture, he positioned them out of sight. To the approaching rider, he would appear to be nothing more than a solitary rancher going about his morning tasks. It was an illusion he'd carefully cultivated over the years, the image of a simple man who'd traded the excitement of his past for the quiet life of animal husbandry. But beneath that peaceful facade lay a different truth. Every day spent training. The wolves, every lesson in coordinated hunting and silent stalking, had been preparation for something he'd always known would come. The frontier was changing, but violence remained a constant companion to those who dared stake their claim on its unforgiving soil. The rider was close enough now that Blackwood could hear the thunder of hooves against earth. His wolves waited, in perfect silence, hidden but ready. Whatever news was racing toward his ranch, he and his unusual family would face it together, as they had faced everything else since that bitter winter day when a half-starved pup had given a grieving tracker a reason to live again. The morning sun climbed higher as Blackwood led his pack to the training grounds, a secluded valley hidden behind his ranch where steep cliffs kept curious eyes at bay. Here, among the twisted pines and weathered rocks, he'd spent years honing his wolves into something unprecedented in the history of man and beast. Shadow moved with the quiet confidence of a born leader, his black coat gleaming like polished obsidian. He was more than just an alpha. He was Blackwood's lieutenant, capable of interpreting complex hand signals and relaying commands to the others through a sophisticated series of vocal and physical cues. When Shadow howled, it wasn't just a call, it was a tactical instruction that could redirect the entire pack's movement in seconds. The twin greys, Ghost and Storm, demonstrated their uncanny ability to work in tandem. They weaved through the obstacle course Blackwood had constructed, moving like smoke through the morning air. Ghost specialized in silent approaches, his paws finding purchase on the softest ground, while Storm excelled at pursuit, his powerful legs capable of maintaining top speed over punishing terrain. "Show me the pincer," Blackwood commanded softly. Without hesitation, the twins split apart, circling wide around an imaginary target. Their coordination was perfect, the result of thousands of hours of practice. They could trap a fleeing enemy between them, cutting off escape routes with a precision that had taken years to perfect. Timber, the russet female, showcased her own specialty. Her keen nose could track a scent through rain, snow, or the aftermath of fire. She'd once followed a week-old trail for 20 miles, never losing the spoor despite crossing 3 streams. Now she moved through the training ground, her nose working the air, cataloguing every new scent that had entered their territory overnight. Luna, though youngest, had perhaps the most unusual gift. She could sense fear, reading the subtle changes in human behavior that signaled mounting panic. Blackwood had discovered this ability during a tracking exercise when she'd anticipated a cornered fugitive's desperate attempt to ambush them. Her warning had saved lives that day, and since then he'd refined her talent into a crucial early warning system. Thunder, the largest of the males, was their heavy hitter. Massive even by wolf standards, he could bring down a full-grown elk alone. But it was his intelligence that truly set him apart. He understood complex sequences of commands, could adapt tactics on the fly, and had an almost supernatural ability to anticipate Blackwood's needs in the heat of action. As the morning wore on, Blackwood ran them through increasingly complex drills. The wolves moved like a single organism, splitting and reforming, executing flanking maneuvers and coordinated attacks. They could herd targets, set up ambushes, and even create diversions, skills that went far beyond normal wolf behavior. "Hold," Blackwood called out, and the pack froze instantly. He'd spent months teaching them this command, the ability to remain absolutely still, regardless of provocation. It was a skill that could mean the difference between a successful ambush and a premature confrontation. Each wolf had their own training routine, tailored to their strengths. Shadow worked on command and control, practicing the subtle variations. In his howls that could redirect the pack's movement, the twins refined their synchronized hunting patterns, while Timber worked complex scent puzzles that Blackwood prepared before dawn. Luna practiced reading human behavior using townspeople, heard by Blackwood, who would act out various scenarios. Her ability to distinguish between genuine threat and harmless anxiety had saved them from unnecessary confrontations more than once. Thunder, meanwhile, focused on power and precision, learning to moderate his tremendous strength according to the situation. But it wasn't all tactical training. Blackwood understood that their bond went deeper than mere obedience. Each wolf received individual attention, quiet moments where he reinforced their trust and affection. He knew their personalities, their moods, their quirks, Shadow's dignified pride, the twins' playful competition, Timber's maternal instincts toward Luna, and Thunder's gentle giant nature despite his fearsome capabilities. This wasn't just a pack of trained animals. They were family, bound by something, stronger than blood, a shared purpose, and absolute trust. As the morning's training session wound down, Blackwood watched them rest in the dappled sunlight, their chests heaving from exertion, but their eyes alert and satisfied. He'd created something unique here, something that combined the natural abilities of wolves with human tactical thinking. But more than that, he'd forged a unit that could face whatever dangers the frontier might throw at them. What he didn't know then, as the sun climbed toward noon, was just how soon those skills would be put to the ultimate test. The town of Millbrook consisted of little more than a main street, a handful of weathered buildings, and enough secrets to fill a library. As Blackwood rode in on his sturdy bay horse, Shadow and Thunder flanking him invisibly in the tree line, he could feel the tension in the air. Townsfolk hurried about their business, speaking in hushed tones, their eyes darting nervously toward the northern road. "Jim!" a voice called out from the doctor's office. Sarah Matthews stood in the doorway, her graying hair pulled back severely, medical bag in hand. She was the only person in town who knew the full truth about his past, and more importantly, about his wolves. "You need to hear this." He dismounted, noting how the locals gave him a wide berth. 15 years in the area hadn't softened their wariness of the wolf man. The whispers followed him up the wooden sidewalk, tales of his supposed dealings with dark forces, of midnight rituals beneath the moon. If they only knew, the truth was far more remarkable than their superstitions. Inside Sarah's office, the familiar smell of herbs and medicines filled the air. She closed the door behind them, her face grave. "The Hawkins gang hit the Henderson place yesterday. Burned it to the ground." Blackwood's jaw tightened. "Casualties. John Henderson took a bullet, but he'll live. His wife and kids were in town, thank God." Sarah pulled out a chair, gesturing for him to sit. "But that's not why I called you here. They're asking about you, Jim, about your ranch." His mind raced back 20 years, to his days as a frontier tracker. He'd crossed paths with the Hawkins clan before, a family of ruthless outlaws who'd carved out a bloody reputation across 3 territories. Marcus Hawkins still leading them? His son now, Caleb. Sarah's voice dropped lower. "They say he's worse than his father ever was. No conscience, no mercy. And he's got twice the men his daddy had." A memory surfaced, a young Caleb Hawkins watching with dead eyes as his father gunned down a shopkeeper. Even then, Blackwood had sensed something twisted in the boy. How many men? 15, maybe 20. They'd been working their way through the valley, hitting isolated ranches. But the way they're asking about you... She hesitated. "They know something, Jim, about your past." Outside, a wolf's howl echoed faintly, Luna's warning call. Someone was watching the doctor's office. Blackwood moved to the window, his movements casual but his senses alert, a rider at the end of the street, trying too hard to look uninterested. "Your timing's still sharp," Sarah noted, reading his reaction. "You never really retired, did you? All these years training those wolves?" "Preparing," he corrected. "The frontier's changing, Sarah, but not fast enough. There'll always be predators." She touched his arm gently. "You're not that same tracker anymore, Jim. You've built something here, something unique. Don't let old ghosts drag you back." But they both knew it was too late for that. The past was riding hard toward his ranch, carrying torches and ammunition. "Tell me about Henderson's place. How many men hit it?" 6, according to John. They knew exactly when to strike, how to approach without being seen. Someone's been scouting. For them. Her meaning was clear. There was a traitor in town. Blackwood thought of his wolves, of the countless hours spent training them, of Shadow's leadership, Thunder's power, the twins' coordination, Timber's tracking skills, and Luna's ability to sense danger. He'd built his pack for this very purpose, not just for protection, but for justice in a land where the law was often too distant or too corrupt to help. "You're going to fight them, aren't you?" Sarah's voice held both concern and understanding. She'd been there in the aftermath of his wife's death, had watched him transform grief into purpose through his work with the wolves. "No," Blackwood replied, checking his pistol with practiced ease. "I'm going to hunt them, same as I did in the old days, but this time," he smiled grimly, "this time I've got better trackers." A commotion erupted outside, shouts and the thunder of hooves. The Henderson boy burst into the doctor's office, out of breath. "Riders coming! The Hawkins gang! They're heading for Blackwood's ranch." Sarah grabbed her medical bag. "Jim, whatever you're planning—" But he was already moving, his stride, purposeful. "Get everyone off the streets, Sarah. What's coming isn't for their eyes." As he mounted his horse, he gave a sharp whistle. In the distance, 5 haunting howls answered. His pack was ready. The chase was about to begin, and Blackwood couldn't help but feel a familiar surge of anticipation. He'd spent 15 years turning 6 wolves into the ultimate hunting unit. Now it was time to show the Hawkins gang exactly what they were up against. Blackwood urged his horse faster, but the smoke rising from the direction of his ranch told him he was already too late. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the valley as he rode, his mind racing through scenarios, counting the precious minutes. He'd ordered his wolves to stay hidden in the forest's edge, a decision that would save their lives but cost him dearly. The Hawkins gang had planned this well. They'd created the diversion in town to draw him out, knowing the exact distance between Millbrook and his ranch. As he crested the final hill, the full extent of their brutality became clear. His barn was engulfed in flames, the wooden structure crackling and groaning as fire consumed it. His cattle lay slaughtered in the pasture, their carcasses a message written in blood. Through the smoke, he counted at least 12 riders, their faces masked, moving with the coordinated precision of men who'd done this many times before. A shot rang out, and Blackwood felt the searing pain of a bullet grazing his shoulder. He threw himself from his horse, rolling behind a fallen log as more shots peppered the ground around him. They'd been waiting for him. "That's far enough, tracker," a voice called out. Young, cruel, carrying the authority of command. Caleb Hawkins. 20 years ago, you hunted my father like an animal, tracked him for 3 weeks across the territory. Remember? Blackwood pressed his hand against his bleeding shoulder, his mind calculating angles and distances. He could make out shapes through the smoke, men positioning themselves to flank him. "I remember he died like one too," he called back, knowing the words would enrage the young gang leader. The response came in the form of more gunfire, closer this time. They were tightening the noose. Through the chaos, Blackwood caught glimpses of their operation, the precision of their movements, the way they covered each other. This wasn't just revenge. It was an exhibition of power. "Burn it all!" Caleb's voice rang out. "Every last building, every fence post. Let everyone know what happens when they stand against the Hawkins gang." The heat became unbearable as they set fire to his cabin. Blackwood watched 15 years of his life go up in flames. The training equipment for his wolves, the journals documenting their progress, the last photographs of his wife. Each crackling beam felt like a physical blow. A bullet found its mark, tearing through his leg. Blackwood stumbled, catching himself against a smouldering fence post. The pain was intense, but he forced himself to stay conscious. He could hear them approaching, their boots crunching on the burning debris. "Did you really think you could retire?" Caleb emerged from the smoke like a demon, revolver aimed at Blackwood's chest. He was younger than his father had been, but his eyes held the same cold emptiness. "A man like you, the legendary tracker who brought down the worst outlaws in the territory." Blackwood saw movement behind Caleb, more gang members emerging, their guns trained on him. The young leader's face split into a cruel smile. "You're a relic, old man. The frontier's changing. It belongs to men like me now." The blow came from behind, a rifle butt to the back of his head. Blackwood fell forward, his vision blurring. Through the haze of pain and smoke, he heard Caleb's final words. "Let him burn with the rest of it. Let them find whatever's left tomorrow." As consciousness faded, Blackwood focused on one thought. His wolves were safe, hidden in the forest as he'd commanded. His last sensation was being dragged and thrown into the burning ruins of his barn, the sound of hooves and cruel laughter fading into the distance. The Hawkins gang rode away victorious, leaving behind what they thought was a dead man in a burning ranch. They didn't notice the 6 pairs of eyes watching from the tree line, didn't hear the low growls of fury as their pack leader lay motionless in the flames. They had no way of knowing that their true nightmare was just beginning. Through the haze of pain and smoke, Blackwood felt teeth gently gripping his collar, dragging him from the burning wreckage. Shadow and Thunder worked in tandem, pulling their master to safety while the other wolves formed a protective circle. Around them, the cool night air hit his lungs like a blessing, clearing his mind enough to assess the damage. His leg was badly wounded, his shoulder still bleeding, and burns covered his left side. But he was alive, something the Hawkins gang would soon regret. Luna whined softly, pressing against his good side, while Timber began licking his wounds with careful attention. "Good. Good pack," he managed to whisper, his voice hoarse from the smoke. The wolves had followed his last command perfectly, staying hidden until the gang was gone. Now, in the flickering light of his burning ranch, he saw the rage in their eyes, a mirror of his own fury. Sarah appeared like a ghost through the smoke, medical bag in hand. She'd followed him from town, knowing he'd need help. "Don't talk," she ordered, already cutting away his burned clothing. "They think you're dead. Let's keep it that way for now." As she worked on his wounds, Blackwood watched his wolves. They were already moving with purpose, Ghost and Storm circling the perimeter, while Shadow stood guard. Even now their training held, each one knowing their role in crisis. Through the pain of Sarah's ministrations, a plan began to form. "The gang will split up," he said through gritted teeth as she stitched his leg. "Standard procedure after a raid this big. They'll scatter, meet up later at a predetermined spot." His years of tracking outlaws had taught him their patterns, their habits. "You're in no condition to go after them," Sarah protested. But there was resignation in her voice. She knew him too well. Blackwood reached out to Shadow, who came immediately to his side. "I don't need to be." His hand rested on the alpha's powerful neck. "I've spent 15 years preparing them for this. Each wolf knows how to track, how to hunt, how to coordinate with the others." The pack gathered around him as he spoke, their eyes reflecting the dying flames of his ranch. They could smell his blood, sense his pain, and their usual disciplined calm had been replaced by a controlled fury. These weren't just trained animals anymore. They were weapons waiting to be unleashed. "Timber," he called softly. The russet female approached, nose already working the air. He pulled a bloody rag from one of the gang members from his pocket. The days picked up during the brief fight. "Hunt!" The command set off a chain reaction. Timber's nose went to the ground, while Ghost and Storm moved to flanking positions. Shadow waited for Blackwood's next order, the entire pack poised on the edge of action. "They'll kill you if they find out you survived," Sarah warned, finishing the bandaging. Blackwood's laugh was harsh in the smoke-filled air. "No, Sarah, they're the ones who don't realize they're already dead." He turned to his pack, his voice taking on the command tone they knew so well. "Shadow, Ghost, Storm, North Trail, Thunder, Luna, take the east. Timber, lead the hunt." The wolves moved like spirits into the darkness, their forms melting into the night. They would track the scattered gang members, follow them to their hideouts, learn their patterns. And when the time was right, when the outlaws had relaxed into false security, thinking their victory complete, that's when the real hunt would begin. Sarah helped him onto her horse. "You need proper medical attention." "What I need," Blackwood replied, watching his wolves disappear into the darkness, "is revenge. And I've got 6 angels of death to help me get it." The night air carried the sound of a distant wolf's howl, Timber already on the trail. One by one, the other wolves joined the call, their voices rising in a haunting chorus that echoed through the valley. To anyone else, it might have sounded like ordinary wolves. But Blackwood knew better. It was a promise, a declaration of war. And somewhere out there in the darkness, the scattered members of the Hawkins gang would hear that howl and feel a shiver of primal fear, not yet knowing that they had just become prey. 2 days after the raid, Jake "Snake" Wilson made camp in a small clearing 15 miles north of Millbrook. As Caleb Hawkins' chief scout, he prided himself on choosing secure locations, but something about this night had his nerves on edge. The shadows seemed deeper than usual, the forest sounds just a little too quiet. He'd split from the main group as planned, taking his share of the recent raid's earnings. In 3 days, they'd all rendezvous at the old Carson mine. Standard procedure after a big job. But until then, he was on his own, just the way he liked it. The first hint that something was wrong came when his horse started getting skittish. The animal's ears kept twitching, its eyes rolling white at the darkness beyond the firelight. Snake had learned long ago to trust a horse's instincts, but his pride wouldn't let him break camp like some greenhorn spooked by night sounds. 100 yards away, concealed in the undergrowth, Ghost and Storm watched their target with predatory patience. Shadow had assigned them this prey, the man whose tracking skills had helped the gang find Blackwood's ranch. Through the mental link that only twins could share, they coordinated their approach, using every technique Blackwood had taught them. Over the years, meanwhile, across the territory, the other gang members were making their separate ways to the rendezvous point. Marcus Reed, the gang's demolitions expert, had holed up in an abandoned church, surrounded by his precious dynamite. Timber tracked him silently, her keen nose picking up the sharp scent of explosives. The Thorne brothers, Bill and Charlie, had headed west, planning to lie low in a mining camp they knew. Thunder and Luna followed, their larger forms keeping to the deeper shadows as they stalked their quarry. Luna's special talent was already at work, sensing the younger brothers growing unease. Back at Snake's camp, the hunter was about to become the hunted. Ghost circled wide to the north, while Storm moved south, executing the pincer maneuver they'd practiced countless times. Their movements were silent, their coordination perfect, when Snake's horse finally panicked and broke its tether, fleeing. Into the night, he made his fatal mistake. "Damn beast," he muttered, standing and moving away from his fire to look for the horse. The moment he stepped into the darkness, the twins made their move. Storm emerged first, a grey shadow that drew Snake's attention and made him reach for his gun. It was a deliberate distraction, allowing Ghost to approach unseen from behind. The attack was swift, coordinated, and lethal. Snake never even got a chance to fire his weapon. Across the territory, similar scenes were playing out. Timber had located Marcus Reed, watching as he fortified his position in the church. Her howl, coded and precise, transmitted the location to Blackwood, who was already planning the next phase from Sarah's clinic. The Thorne brothers, spooked by Luna's psychological warfare, had abandoned their original plan and were now moving directly toward the rendezvous point. It was exactly what Blackwood had predicted. Fear would drive them to seek safety in numbers. In his temporary sanctuary at Sarah's clinic, Blackwood studied the map he'd marked with his wolves' reported positions. Each howl they sent brought new intelligence, allowing him to piece together the gang's movements and plans. Sarah watched him work, concerned by the cold calculation in his eyes. "You're not just killing them," she observed, changing his bandages. "You're taking them apart, piece by piece, breaking them down." "Every predator knows," Blackwood replied, marking another position on his map as a distant howl reached them. "You don't just attack the prey. You isolate them, make them feel vulnerable. Let fear do half the work." The wolves were performing beyond even his expectations. Years of training exercises had prepared them for exactly this kind of coordinated hunt. Each pair knew their targets, understood their roles, and executed their tasks with lethal precision. By morning, Snake Wilson's body would be found by a passing stagecoach. The official report would blame a mountain lion attack, but Caleb Hawkins would know better. The howls that echoed through the territory that night carried a clear message. The hunter had become the hunted, and his greatest nightmare was just beginning. Marcus Reed's hands shook as he reloaded his shotgun. For the past hour, something had been circling the abandoned church, testing its defenses. He'd caught glimpses of movement in the moonlight, a russet-colored shape that appeared and vanished, like smoke. His barricaded position in the church bell tower gave him a clear view of the surrounding area, but that only made the waiting worse. Timber watched from the shadows, her keen nose telling her that the man was alone and terrified. The scent of dynamite hung heavy in the air, enough explosives to level half a mountain. She'd already relayed this information through a series of coded howls, and now she waited for the response. It came with the pre-dawn light, Thunder's massive form materializing from the tree line. The largest wolf moved with deliberate slowness, making himself visible to Reed. It was a calculated move, part of Blackwood's strategy. Show the prey something obvious to focus on while the real threat approaches unseen. "Come on then," Reed shouted, his voice cracking. He fired at Thunder, but the wolf was already moving, drawing the man's attention exactly where they wanted it. Below, Timber slipped into the church through a broken window, her paws silent on the wooden floor. In his panic, Reed had made a critical mistake. He'd stored his dynamite on the ground floor, thinking only about defending against humans who would have to come through the door. But wolves weren't bound by human tactics. Timber located the explosives, then retreated. Outside, Thunder continued his psychological warfare, appearing and disappearing at the edges of Reed's vision. The man's shots became more erratic, his curses more desperate. Dawn was breaking when Reed heard it, a soft scraping from the floor below. He rushed to the trapdoor, expecting to find a wolf trying to climb the ladder to his position. Instead, he saw Timber standing next to his stockpile of dynamite, her eyes reflecting the early morning light. In her jaws, she held something that made his blood run cold, the end of a fuse already lit. Reed's scream echoed across the valley as he scrambled down the ladder, all thoughts of defense forgotten. He burst out of the church door at full sprint, only to find Thunder waiting. The massive wolf stood directly in his path, a dark mountain of muscle and fury. In his last moments, Marcus Reed finally understood. These weren't just wolves. They were executioners. The explosion that followed erased all evidence of what had really happened there. Miles away, in a camp hidden deep in the woods, Bill and Charlie Thorne heard the distant boom. They'd been on edge ever since separating from the main group, haunted by glimpses of shapes in the darkness and howls that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "We should have never hit Blackwood's place," Charlie muttered, stoking their campfire higher against the morning chill. "Something ain't right about that man." "Shut up," Bill snapped, but his own hands were unsteady as he checked his rifle for the 100th time. "Snake'll be at the rendezvous point tomorrow. We just gotta make it till then." Neither brother saw Luna ghosting through the underbrush, reading their fear like an open book. Each time they'd tried to sleep over the past 2 days, she'd crept closer, letting them catch just enough of a glimpse to keep them awake, on edge. Now they were exhausted, making mistakes. Thunder joined her silently, his massive form a sharp contrast to her sleek shape. The wolves communicated through subtle gestures and body language, coordinating their final approach. The brothers had unknowingly walked into a natural box canyon, with high walls on 3 sides and only one way out. "Did you hear that?" Charlie's voice was barely a whisper. Bill raised his rifle, scanning the trees. The wolves had them exactly where they wanted them. Tired, frightened, and thinking only about threats from ground level. Thunder and Luna exchanged a look that seemed almost human in its understanding. Then Luna let out a howl, not the hunting call the brothers expected, but something that sounded almost like laughter. It was the last sound the Thorne brothers would ever hear. When Caleb Hawkins' men finally found the bodies 2 days later, they couldn't explain how 2 experienced outlaws had been taken down so efficiently. But the message was clear. The Hawkins gang was being hunted by something that didn't fight like any normal predator. Back in Millbrook, Blackwood received the news of his wolves' success with grim satisfaction. 3 of Hawkins's key men eliminated, and the gang still had no idea what they were really facing. But this was just the beginning, a demonstration of what his pack was capable of. The real hunt was about to begin. Caleb Hawkins paced the floor of the Carson Mine's main chamber, his boot heels echoing off the rough-hewn walls. Only half his men had made it to the rendezvous point, and those who had arrived were jumping at shadows. The news of Snake Wilson's death had been bad enough, but the explosion at the church and the disappearance of the Thorne brothers pointed to something more systematic than random animal attacks. "It ain't natural," Pete Morgan, his second-in-command, muttered. "First Snake, then Reed and the Thorns. Something's hunting us, boss." "They're wolves." Davis, one of the younger gang members, spoke up. His face was pale, hands shaking as he cleaned his rifle. "Had to be the ones that belonged to Blackwood. We all saw them tracks around his ranch." "Blackwood's dead," Caleb snapped, but doubt gnawed at him. He'd seen the old tracker's body in the burning barn himself, hadn't he? But then again, the fire had been so intense. Outside the mine entrance, Shadow and Ghost observed the gang's growing paranoia. The alpha wolf's keen ears picked up every word of their heated discussion, while Ghost noted the patrol patterns of the guards they'd posted. Every detail would be relayed back to Blackwood through their sophisticated system of howls. Inside, the argument was escalating. "We should pull out," Morgan insisted. "Head south, split up for a few months until things cool down." "We're not running from a bunch of mangy wolves." Caleb's voice cracked with barely controlled fury. "Double the guards. Set up more torches around the perimeter. Nothing's getting close to this camp." But fear had already taken root among his men. Those who'd been alone on the trail spoke of being stalked by shadows, of howls that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Even the horses were on edge, requiring constant attention to keep them from bolting. 2 miles away, in a hidden cave that Sarah had helped him prepare, Blackwood listened to his wolves' reports. Each howl painted part of a picture, the number of men, their positions, their declining morale. His wounds were healing, but he forced himself to be patient, Let the wolves do their work first. Their fuel and supplies will run low soon, he explained to Sarah as she changed his bandages. Fear burns a lot of energy. They'll have to send out hunting parties, maybe even a supply run to town. And that's when you'll strike, she asked, though she already knew the answer. Blackwood's smile was cold. That's when the pack will separate them, pick them off one by one. Caleb Hawkins will watch his gang be dismantled piece by piece, just like he tried to do to my home. Back at the mine, night was falling. The gang had built fires at regular intervals, creating a ring of light around their camp. But the flames that were meant to keep the wolves at bay only served to destroy their night vision and create deeper shadows beyond the perimeter. Thunder and Luna worked these shadows with practiced skill. Luna's ability to sense fear helped them identify the weakest links among the guards, the ones most likely to break under pressure. Thunder's massive form would occasionally move just at the edge of the firelight, drawing terrified shots that wasted ammunition and frayed nerves. Even further, "I'm telling you, they're out there right now," Davis whispered, his eyes wild. "Watching us, planning." "Shut your mouth," Caleb backhanded him across the face. "Next man who talks about wolves gets a bullet. We're the Hawkins gang. We don't fear nothing." But his words rang hollow in the flickering darkness. 3 more men deserted that night, trying to slip away under cover of darkness. None of them made it past the tree line. Their screams served only to further demoralize those who remained. By dawn, the gang's numbers had dwindled from 15 to 8. Those who remained were clustered in the mine entrance, wild-eyed and trigger-happy. They had become prey animals, and they knew it. Shadow watched their deterioration with cold satisfaction. The alpha wolf had learned well from his master, not just how to hunt, but how to break an enemy's spirit. Through the morning mist, he let out a long, mournful howl that echoed off the canyon walls. It wasn't a signal or a command this time. It was a promise of what was to come. Inside the mine, Caleb Hawkins gripped his rifle tighter and tried to convince himself that they were just wolves, just animals. But in his heart, he knew better. He had awakened something far more dangerous than mere beasts when he'd burned down that ranch. He had started a war. He was rapidly losing the will to fight. Dawn brought no relief to the besieged Hawkins gang. Their supplies were running dangerously low, and the constant vigilance had left them exhausted. Caleb Hawkins stood at the mine entrance, dark circles under his eyes, watching as his remaining men attempted to fortify their position with whatever they could find. "We need food and ammunition," Morgan reported, his voice barely above a whisper. 2 days at most, then we're in real trouble." Caleb's mind raced through options, each worse than the last. The wolves had them pinned down, their hunting patterns, making it impossible to leave the safety of the mine for more than a few minutes. 3 men had already died trying to reach the stream just 50 yards away. "What about Blackwood's body?" Davis asked suddenly. "Did anyone actually check it after the fire?" The question hung in the air like gunsmoke. Caleb remembered the burning barn, the satisfaction of leaving the tracker to die. But now doubt crept in, feeding the fear that had taken root in his mind. Mile away, concealed in the rocky outcroppings, Timber and Storm watched the gang's movements. Every shift change, every nervous conversation, every failed attempt to break the wolves' perimeter was noted and communicated back to Shadow, who relayed the information to Blackwood through their sophisticated signaling system. "They'll have to make a supply run soon," Blackwood told Sarah as he checked his healing wounds. He'd moved his observation post closer to the mine, operating from a hidden cabin that gave him a clear view of the valley. "When they do, they'll send their best. Riders, probably try a feint to distract the wolves." Sarah watched him mark positions on his map, noting how his hands remained steady despite the violence they were orchestrating. "And your pack is ready?" They've been ready for 15 years. Back at the mine, Caleb had finally formulated a plan. "We'll split into 3 groups," he announced to his remaining men. 2 riders head south, making plenty of noise. 2 more go east, firing as they ride. Those wolves will have to split up to follow them. "And the rest of us?" Morgan asked. Already seeing the flaws in the plan, "We head straight for town. Hit the general store, get what we need, and anyone who gets in our way becomes an example." Caleb's eyes had taken on a fevered gleam. "It's time to remind these people who we are." None of them noticed Luna ghosting through the shadows at the edge of their camp, reading their fear and desperation. The young wolf had already sensed their breaking point approaching, and now she watched them prepare for their desperate gambit. The plan was set in motion at noon, when the wolves would have the least advantage. The first group thundered south, shooting wildly into the air and drawing thunder and storm into an easy pursuit. The eastern group followed minutes later, with Ghost and Timber seemingly falling for the diversion. Caleb led the main group straight for Millbrook, feeling a surge of confidence as no wolves appeared to challenge them. The trap was perfect in its simplicity. Divide the pack, create enough chaos to slip through their perimeter. What they didn't know was that Shadow and Luna had never moved from their positions. The alpha wolf had been waiting for exactly this moment, when desperation would drive the gang into making a crucial mistake. The 2 diversionary groups never made it more than a mile. Thunder and Storm ran their quarry straight into a box canyon, while Ghost and Timber demonstrated why they were Blackwood's elite hunting pair. No shots were fired, no bodies would ever be found. Caleb's group rode hard for town, their horses lathered and breathing heavy. They were halfway there when Luna's howl pierced the air. Not a hunting cry, but a signal. Ahead of them, Shadow emerged from behind a boulder, standing directly in their path. The horses reared in panic, throwing 2 riders. The others fought to control their mounts as more howls echoed from behind them. Turning back, they saw Luna materializing from the brush, her young face masks in silent fury. "It's just 2 wolves," Caleb screamed, raising his rifle. "Ride them down!" But his men had reached their breaking point. In their fear-addled minds, every shadow now held deadly teeth. Every rustle of leaves promised violence. They broke formation, scattering in different directions, despite Caleb's enraged orders. Shadow and Luna made no move to pursue. They didn't have to. In their panic, the gang members were riding straight into the territories of the other wolves, who had already prepared their killing grounds with the patience of expert hunters. Caleb found himself alone, his horse trembling beneath him as Shadow's golden eyes locked onto his. For the first time since the raid on Blackwood's ranch, true fear gripped his heart. These weren't just animals hunting them. This was judgment. Sarah Matthews knew every face in Millbrook, which made the stranger in her clinic waiting room stand out like a wolf among sheep. He was trying too hard to look casual, clutching his arm with an obviously fake injury. More telling was the way. His eyes kept darting to the window, watching the street. "Feed fever's hitting the cattle hard up north," she said loudly enough for the mysterious patient to hear. "Driving the herd south toward Carson's old mine." She bandaged a child's scraped knee as she spoke, her voice carrying clearly. "Shame. About all those wolves following them." The stranger shifted uncomfortably, and Sarah noted the gun bulging beneath his coat. One of Hawkins' men, no doubt, sent to gather intelligence. She'd been expecting them. A coded howl echoed from the hills, Timber acknowledging the information. Sarah had learned their basic signals over the years, another secret she kept for Blackwood. The stranger left without ever seeing the doctor, mounting his horse and racing back toward the mine. In his hidden cabin, Blackwood received Timber's report with grim satisfaction. Sarah's performance had been perfect, feeding the gang exactly what he wanted them to believe. "They'll think the wolves hunting them are just part of a larger pack following the cattle," he mused, marking new positions on his map. Ghost and Storm were already moving into position, using the rugged terrain to conceal their approach. The Gang would expect wolves to come from the north now, following the non-existent cattle. Instead, death would come from the east and west. Back at the mine, Caleb Hawkins listened to his scout's report with desperate hope. "You're sure about this? The wolves aren't specifically hunting us?" "That's what the doctor said," the scout confirmed, still catching his breath. "Just some wild pack following the herd south. We've been jumping at shadows for nothing." Morgan wasn't convinced. "What about Snake? The thorns? That wasn't random wolf behavior." "Shut up." Caleb's composure was cracking. "This is our chance. We wait until dark, then slip out heading south. Let these wolves chase cattle while we disappear with our takes." But Shadow, watching from his hidden vantage point, saw their preparations with cold satisfaction. Every move they made now was predictable, driven by fear and false hope. As darkness fell, the gang began breaking camp, believing they'd finally found their escape route. Thunder and Luna positioned themselves along the southern escape route, hidden in shadows so deep even the moonlight couldn't reach them. The gang's horses sensed them, growing skittish as their riders urged them forward. "See!" Caleb's voice carried on the night air as they encountered no immediate resistance. Just regular wolves avoiding humans like they should. They made it. Almost a mile before Ghost and Storm sprang the first trap. The twin wolves appeared simultaneously on both sides of the trail, their coordinated movements herding the gang exactly where Blackwood wanted them. "These ain't regular wolves," Morgan screamed, firing wildly into the darkness. His shots went wide as his horse reared, spooked by Luna's sudden appearance on the trail ahead. The gang scattered again, but this time each breakaway group found wolves waiting for them. Years of training exercises had prepared the pack for exactly this scenario, splitting and herding prey through carefully chosen killing grounds. Caleb found himself being driven steadily eastward, though every turn he took seemed to be his own choice. Shadow's psychological warfare was a masterpiece of subtle manipulation, using the gang leader's panic to guide him while making him think he was escaping. In his hidden position, Blackwood watched through his spyglass as his wolves demonstrated everything he'd spent years teaching them. The gang wasn't just being killed, they were being systematically dismantled by a superior hunting force. Sarah arrived at his observation post just as the screaming began. "You're enjoying this," she said. Not quite a question. "No," Blackwood replied, listening to the distant gunfire grow more sporadic. "But I am appreciating their skill. Everything I taught them, every drill and exercise, it was all for this moment." Through his spyglass, he watched Shadow drive Caleb Hawkins toward the final trap. The gang leader who'd laughed while burning down his ranch was about to learn the true meaning of fear. "Your wolves won't kill him," Sarah realized, noting how the pack was deliberately keeping Caleb alive while eliminating his men. "They're saving him for you." Blackwood's smile was as cold as the mountain wind. "A wolf pack always honors its alpha's right to the kill, and Caleb Hawkins is mine." Caleb Hawkins stumbled through the darkness, his once fine coat now torn and bloodied. His horse was long gone, spooked by the wolves that seemed to materialize from every shadow. Behind him, the screams of his men had gradually faded to silence. Now he was alone, running on pure instinct and terror. Shadow tracked him with methodical precision, steering him toward a specific clearing. The alpha wolf knew this location well. They had practiced this exact scenario countless times. Each member of the pack moved in perfect synchronization, invisible in the darkness, but ever present. Caleb's boot caught a root, and he fell hard, his pistol skittering away into the underbrush. As he scrambled to his feet, a memory surfaced, his father, Marcus Hawkins, telling him about the tracker who'd hunted him years ago. Blackwood didn't just track people, his father had said. He read them, predicted them, became death itself. The moon broke through the clouds, illuminating the clearing ahead. Caleb froze. There, sitting calmly on a fallen log, was James Blackwood. He looked like a ghost in the pale light, his wounds still visible, but his eyes were sharp and cold. "Your father had more spine," Blackwood said quietly, not moving from his position. "He at least faced me when the end came." "You're dead," Caleb whispered, his voice cracking. "We burned you." "You tried." Blackwood's hand rested casually on Shadow's head as the massive wolf materialized beside him. "But you forgot what your father knew. Always make sure of your kill." One by one, the other wolves emerged from the darkness, forming a circle around the clearing. Caleb spun slowly, counting them. 6 pairs of eyes reflected the moonlight, each wolf positioned with tactical precision. "What your father never told you," Blackwood continued, his voice carrying clearly in the night air, "was why I hunted him. It wasn't just about the law. He killed my wife, Sarah, shot her dead when she witnessed one of his raids." The revelation hung in the air like smoke. "You're lying," Caleb snarled. "My father would have told me, would he? The great Marcus Hawkins, admitting he murdered an unarmed woman?" Blackwood's laugh was devoid of humor. "No, he took that shame to his grave. Just like he never told you about the other innocent people he killed, the families he destroyed," Thunder growled low, picking up on his master's controlled rage. The sound was echoed by the other wolves, creating a haunting chorus that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "So I hunted him," Blackwood continued, "tracked him for weeks. And when I finally cornered him, you know what his last words were?" He leaned forward, his eyes boring into Caleb's. "He begged me to spare his son, said you were innocent of his sins." Caleb's legs gave out, and he fell to his knees. You let me live?" "I did. Honored a dying man's last wish." Blackwood stood slowly. "And how did you repay that mercy? By becoming worse than your father ever was. By burning my home, destroying everything I built." The wolves began moving, tightening their circle with practiced precision. Luna's talent for sensing fear told her that Caleb was close to breaking, his bravado shattered by the weight of revelation. "And terror, my wolves have hunted your men," Blackwood said, his voice taking on a ceremonial quality. "They've earned their kills, proven themselves better predators than you could ever be. But you?" He drew his knife, the blade catching the moonlight. "You're mine." Shadow raised his head and howled, a sound of triumph, of justice long delayed. One by one the other wolves joined in, their voices rising in a terrifying chorus that echoed through the mountains. It was both a celebration of the hunt's success and a requiem for a blood debt finally being paid. As Blackwood approached, his wolves maintaining their perfect formation, Caleb Hawkins finally understood. He hadn't just awakened an old enemy by burning that ranch. He'd provoked something far more dangerous, a man who'd spent 15 years preparing for this exact moment, training nature's perfect hunters into something even more lethal. The last thing he saw was Blackwood's cold smile and the approving eyes of 6 wolves who had helped their master achieve his ultimate revenge. The morning after Caleb Hawkins' death brought no peace to Millbrook. Sheriff Tom Parker paced his office, a telegram clutched in his trembling hand. The message was clear. More members of the Hawkins gang were coming. Not just a few men, but a small army gathered from other territories. Word of their leader's demise had spread fast, and now his cousins were riding hard for revenge. But that wasn't what truly troubled the sheriff. It was the second piece of news, the one that made his betrayal inevitable. They had his daughter taken from her school in Carson City. The price for her safe return was simple: deliver James Blackwood. Across town, Sarah Matthews sensed something was wrong the moment she opened her clinic. Small things seemed out of place. A chair slightly moved, her medical records disturbed. Then she found it. A small, torn piece of paper with a hastily scrawled warning from one of her patients. "They know about you. Run." She was reaching for her emergency bag when the door opened. Sheriff Parker stood there, his face a mask of anguish. Behind him, two deputies had their hands on their guns. "Tom?" she asked, though she already knew. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he whispered. "They have Emily." Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Blackwood and his wolves were resting after their night of vengeance. Shadow's ears suddenly pricked forward, catching a distant sound that humans couldn't hear. The alpha wolf's behavior instantly put the entire pack on alert. Timber arrived minutes later, moving fast despite her exhaustion. Her coded howl carried devastating news. Sarah had been taken, held in the sheriff's office under guard. More importantly, the town was filling with unfamiliar men, advanced scouts for the approaching gang members. Blackwood felt his world tilt for the second time in his life. Sarah, the woman who'd saved him after his wife's death, who'd helped him train his wolves, who'd kept his secrets all these years, was now in danger because of him. "Bring me my rifle," he told Shadow, his voice hard as iron. But the alpha wolf didn't move, instead fixing him with an intense stare. The other wolves gathered around, their posture communicating clear concern. They could sense their master was about to act on pure emotion rather than tactical wisdom. Luna whined softly, pressing against his leg. Her special talent for reading human emotion told her that Blackwood was teetering on the edge of blind rage, the same kind of reckless anger that had led Caleb Hawkins to his doom. "You're right," he acknowledged, forcing himself to think clearly. "We do this smart. We do this together." In Millbrook, Sarah sat in a cell while Sheriff Parker tried to explain. "They're holding Emily in an old hunting cabin up north. Once they have Blackwood, they'll release her. I had no choice." "There's always a choice, Tom," Sarah replied quietly. "And you've chosen to bring hell to our town. These aren't just ordinary outlaws coming. They're worse than Caleb ever was. And now you've given them exactly what they wanted, a way to draw out the one man they fear." "Fear?" The sheriff laughed bitterly. "Blackwood's just one man." Sarah's smile was cold. "No, Tom, he's a pack." Outside the jail, Thunder and Ghost observed unseen from different vantage points, counting guards and noting patrol patterns. Their intelligence would be crucial for what was to come. Storm and Timber were already tracking the scents of the newcomers in town, building a comprehensive map of enemy positions. Shadow and Luna remained with Blackwood as he formulated a plan. The approaching gang members wouldn't arrive for at least a day. That gave them time, but it also meant Sarah would be in enemy hands for longer than he'd like. "They think they can use her to control me," he told his wolves as night fell. "They don't understand what she taught me all those years ago, after I lost everything. You don't let fear of losing someone stop you from doing what's right. You use that fear to make yourself stronger, smarter, more determined." The wolves listened, intently, reading his body language and tone. They had never failed him, and they wouldn't fail him now. But this would be their greatest test, not just as hunters, but as a family protecting one of their own. In her cell, Sarah heard a distant howl and smiled. The sound carried a message that only she and Blackwood would understand. The pack was coming, and this time they weren't coming for revenge, they were coming for justice. As moonlight painted shadows across the town, 6 shapes moved through the darkness with deadly purpose. The hunters who had dismantled the Hawkins gang were now faced with a more complex challenge, one that would require all their skill, all their training, and all their love for the humans they called family. The betrayal had been made. The trap was set, but the trappers had forgotten one crucial detail. Wolves were at their most dangerous when protecting their pack. Night settled over Millbrook like a burial shroud. The town's usual evening bustle had been replaced by an eerie quiet, broken only by the sound of boots on wooden sidewalks as armed men patrolled the streets. In just hours, the advance scouts of the Hawkins family had transformed the peaceful settlement into an armed camp. From his hidden observation post in the church bell tower, Blackwood watched through his spyglass as another group of riders arrived. These weren't ordinary gang members. Their movements were too disciplined, their positioning too tactical. Ex-soldiers, he guessed, hired guns brought in to ensure revenge against the man who'd destroyed Caleb Hawkins. Shadow lay silent beside him, the alpha wolf's golden eyes tracking every movement below. The rest of the pack was deployed around the town's perimeter, each wolf with specific tasks. Through their coded howls, Blackwood had already received detailed intelligence about guard positions, patrol patterns, and most importantly, Sarah's exact location in the jail. "They've got at least 30 men now," he whispered to Shadow. "More coming by morning." The wolf's ear twitched in acknowledgement. Numbers had never concerned them. In some ways, more enemies meant more chaos to exploit. In her cell, Sarah maintained her calm demeanor, though her trained medical eye hadn't missed a detail. The guards were nervous, their fingers too tight on their triggers. These weren't hardened outlaws like Caleb's men. They were mercenaries, which made them both more professional and more likely to break when their plans went wrong. Sheriff Parker stood at his desk, unable to meet her gaze. "You don't understand, Sarah. These men, what they did to that school in Carson City just to get Emily." "I understand perfectly, Tom," she replied quietly. "You've brought wolves to our door, thinking they're just men with guns. But there are worse wolves out there, and they're coming for their own." As if in response to her words, a long, mournful howl echoed through the night. The guards stiffened, hands tightening on their weapons. Another howl answered from a different direction, then another. Soon the sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, surrounding the town in a chorus of impending doom. Thunder and storm moved like shadows through the back alleys, their huge forms somehow invisible in the darkness. They'd done this drill hundreds of times in practice, coordinated urban movement, using buildings and shadows to mask their presence. Now those skills would be put to their ultimate test. Timber worked her way beneath the jail's raised foundation, her keen nose mapping the location of every person inside. Above her, Luna circled the building, reading the fear levels of the guards and marking the ones most likely to break under pressure. Ghost, true to his name, became virtually invisible as he slipped through town, noting ammunition caches and escape routes. Every detail would be crucial when the moment came. Blackwood checked his weapons one final time, rifle, pistol, and the knife he'd used on Caleb. All the years of training, all the drills and practice hunts had been leading to this moment. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about family. "Signal the others," he told Shadow. "It's time." The alpha wolf raised his head and let out a howl unlike any other. Not a hunting cry or a positioning signal, but a call to war. 5 answering howls came back, each one carrying the same message: ready. In her cell, Sarah smiled. She knew that sound, knew what it meant. The pack was no longer hunting outlaws in the wilderness. They were about to demonstrate what 15 years of training could accomplish in the confines of a town. Above Millbrook, storm clouds gathered, promising darkness deeper than any normal night. Perfect conditions for wolves who had learned to become living shadows, who could move through the dark as easily as men moved through daylight. The hired guns positioned their sentries, laid their traps, and prepared their ambushes. They had the numbers, the weapons, and a fortress of buildings to work with. By all military logic, they held every advantage. But they didn't understand what they were truly facing. This wasn't going to be a battle between men. This was going to be a demonstration of what happened when nature's perfect hunters were given human intelligence and years of tactical training. Thunder rumbled overhead as the storm approached. In the darkness, 6 pairs of eyes gleamed with deadly purpose. The night belonged to the wolves, and the hunt was about to begin. The storm broke over Millbrook with biblical fury, sheets of rain reducing visibility to mere feet. Lightning flashed, illuminating the empty streets in harsh bursts that played tricks on the guards' eyes. Every shadow seemed to move, every darkness held teeth. Thunder's massive form crashed through the window of the general store, sending 3 guards sprawling in a shower of glass and splintered wood. Before they could raise their weapons, the huge wolf was gone, vanishing into the rain-swept darkness. But the damage was done. Shots rang out, voices shouted in panic. "Contact at the store," someone yelled. "Get more men over there." Exactly as planned. While attention focused on Thunder's dramatic attack, Ghost and Storm slipped through the shadows behind the jail. Their movement was perfectly synchronized, a dance of death they'd practiced countless times. 2 guards died silently, their bodies dragged into darkness before they could cry out. Inside her cell, Sarah heard the commotion and prepared herself. Years of watching Blackwood train his pack had taught her their methods. This wasn't random. Violence, it was a carefully orchestrated symphony of chaos. Lightning flashed again, and Luna appeared in the jail's doorway like an apparition. The young wolf's ability to sense fear told her exactly which guard would break first. Her eyes locked onto the youngest deputy, who stumbled backward, his shotgun shaking. "Sweet Jesus," he whispered, then turned and ran. His panic spread like wildfire through the remaining guards. Luna let out a howl that seemed to shake the building's foundations. Not a signal this time, but pure psychological warfare. Timber, moving beneath the raised jail floor, located exactly where Sarah's cell was positioned. The wolf's powerful. Jaws closed on a specific support beam, one of the structural weaknesses she'd identified earlier. Wood cracked with a sound like gunshots. Outside, the hired guns were discovering that their numbers meant nothing in this environment. The wolves seemed to be everywhere at once, striking and vanishing, drawing men away from their posts with brutal efficiency. Every attempt to form organized resistance was met with attacks from unexpected quarters. Shadow and Blackwood moved. Through the chaos, like ghosts themselves, the man and wolf working in perfect unity. They reached the jail's back entrance, just as Timber's work caused a section of the floor to collapse, creating a gap beneath Sarah's cell. "Right on time," Sarah said calmly, already moving toward the opening. She'd stayed away from the cells. Front corner, knowing exactly where the floor would give way. Thunder's second attack came at the saloon, sending horses into a panic and scattering another group of guards. Storm and Ghost used the confusion to eliminate the men watching the jail's front entrance, while Luna continued her psychological assault, her howls now echoing from multiple directions thanks to the storm's acoustics. "We need to move," Blackwood said as he helped Sarah through the gap. More riders were spotted coming from the north, but Sarah grabbed his arm. "Emily," she reminded him, "the sheriff's daughter. She's being held at the old hunting cabin," he finished. "I know. Thunder and Storm are already on their way there." A massive explosion rocked the north end of town. One of the ammunition caches Ghost had marked earlier, now deliberately detonated by carefully placed charges. The wolves had learned that human weapons could be turned against their owners. The remaining guards were now firing blindly into the darkness, their professional discipline shattered by an enemy they couldn't effectively fight. These men were used to human opponents, to battles with clear front lines and comprehensible tactics. Nothing in their experience had prepared them for this. Shadow's howl cut through the chaos, a clear command that every wolf recognized. As quickly as it had begun, the attack seemed to cease. The wolves melted away into the storm, leaving behind a scene of complete devastation. "They'll follow us," Sarah said, as Blackwood led her to a waiting horse. "That's exactly what we want," he replied, checking his weapons. "The pack isn't just rescuing you, Sarah. They're leading these men into a trap. The town was just the beginning." In the darkness beyond Millbrook's borders, Thunder and Storm were already closing in on the hunting cabin where Emily was held. Behind them, confused and terrified men gathered their forces for pursuit, not realizing they were being drawn into the second phase of the pack's carefully orchestrated plan. The storm raged on, nature itself seeming to side with the wolves. In its fury, Blackwood smiled. Everything was proceeding exactly as they'd trained for all these years. The hired guns thought the worst was over, that they'd survived the wolves' attack. They had no idea that the real hunt was just beginning. The hunting cabin crouched in darkness, its windows glowing with faint lamplight. Inside, 4 men guarded Emily Parker, confident in their isolated position. They'd been chosen specifically for this task, hardened criminals who wouldn't hesitate to harm a child, but they hadn't counted on facing hunters who could see in the dark. Thunder's attack came from above, the massive wolf crashing through the cabin's wooden roof like an avenging spirit. In the chaos that followed, Storm slipped through a window, her sleek form a blur of lethal precision. The guards barely had time to reach for their weapons. Emily, tied to a chair in the corner, watched with wide eyes as the wolves executed their attack with surgical efficiency. These weren't the savage beasts from campfire stories. They moved with calculated purpose, their coordination almost beautiful in its deadly grace. Miles away, Blackwood led the main pursuit group into a carefully prepared killing ground. The hired guns followed his trail exactly as expected, their confidence growing as they thought they were chasing a desperate man. "Spread out," their leader Mason Hawkins ordered. "He's leading us to the high canyon." Shadow, running alongside Blackwood's horse, let out a series of short howls, positioning signals for Ghost and Timber, who were already moving to cut off any escape routes. The wolves had used this terrain for training exercises countless times. Every rock, every tree, every shadow was a weapon in their arsenal. The first volley of gunfire came from behind, Mason's men opening up as soon as they spotted Blackwood's silhouette against the skyline. But their target suddenly vanished, his horse continuing riderless. A shadow seemed to multiply in the darkness, appearing to attack from multiple directions at once. "It's a trap!" someone screamed, but it was too late. Ghost and Timber emerged. From their hidden positions, their coordinated attack, driving the hired guns toward a steep ravine. Men and horses alike panicked, some plunging over the edge in their desperate attempt to escape. Mason Hawkins found himself isolated, his supposedly elite force scattered by opponents they couldn't effectively fight. Through the chaos, he spotted Blackwood approaching on foot, Shadow at his side. "You're supposed to be dead," Mason snarled, raising his rifle. "Caleb said he left you burning." "Your family never was good at finishing what they started," Blackwood replied calmly. Behind Mason, Luna emerged silently from the shadows, her presence sending his horse into a panic. The gang leader hit the ground hard, his rifle spinning. Away into the darkness. Around them, the sounds of battle were fading. The hired guns who hadn't fled were being systematically eliminated by the wolves, their superior numbers meaning nothing against hunters who owned the night. "You killed my nephew," Mason said, drawing his pistol as he stood. "Destroyed our family's reputation." "Your family destroyed itself," Blackwood countered. "The moment you decided to target innocent people, the moment you threatened a child." The news of Emily's rescue reached them via a long howl from Thunder, the signal they'd practiced for mission success. Mason's face went pale as he realized his last leverage was gone. "What are you?" he whispered, his pistol shaking. "What kind of man turns wolves into soldiers?" Shadow growled, the sound echoed by the other wolves as they emerged from the darkness. They formed a circle around Mason, 6 pairs of eyes reflecting the moonlight like judgment made manifest. "Not soldiers," Blackwood corrected, drawing his knife, the same one he'd used on Caleb. "Family, the kind that avenges its own, the kind that protects the innocent, everything your family forgot how to be." Mason fired, the shot going wide as Luna's sudden snarl broke his nerve. Before he could squeeze the trigger again, Shadow struck. The alpha wolf's attack was precise, disarming the gang leader without killing him. This prey belonged to their master. "My wife," Blackwood said, advancing with deadly purpose. "Sarah, Emily Parker, all the innocent lives your family has destroyed. It ends tonight." The wolves watched in respectful silence, as Blackwood delivered justice with the same clinical efficiency he'd taught them. Mason Hawkins' last thoughts were of how thoroughly he'd underestimated his enemy, not understanding until too late that he wasn't facing just a man with trained animals, but a hybrid force of human intelligence and wolf instinct. Thunder and Storm's return howls confirmed Emily's safe delivery to her father. The sheriff's daughter would never know exactly what had happened this night, but she would always remember the wolves who had freed her, not as monsters, but as heroes. The pack gathered around Blackwood as the night's work concluded. Their mission was complete. Sarah rescued, Emily saved, and the last threat to their family eliminated. In the distance, the few surviving hired guns fled into the darkness, carrying with them a story that would become legend, a warning to any who would threaten the wolf handler of Millbrook Valley. Dawn broke over Millbrook, revealing the scale of the night's violence. The town bore the scars of the wolves' tactical assault, broken windows, bullet-riddled walls, and empty streets that still echoed with the memory of chaos. But amid the destruction, hope emerged with the rising sun. Emily Parker ran into her father's arms, her ordeal over. Sheriff Parker held his daughter tight, tears streaming down his face. Behind them, Sarah Matthews watched with quiet satisfaction, her medical bag ready to tend to the few wounds Emily had suffered during her captivity. "The wolves," Emily said, her voice filled with wonder rather than fear. "They weren't scary at all. They knew exactly what to do, like angels with fur." Thunder and Storm stood at a respectful distance, their usual fierce demeanor softened as they watched the reunion. These wolves, who had torn through hardened criminals hours before, now projected an almost gentle presence, understanding instinctively that their role had changed from warriors to guardians. Blackwood approached the sheriff slowly, shadow at his side. The lawman couldn't meet his eyes, shame and gratitude warring on his face. "I betrayed you," Parker said quietly, "put everyone at risk." "You acted to save your daughter," Blackwood replied. "The only real betrayal would have been standing aside while innocent people suffered. That's what separates us from them." His gaze drifted to where Mason Hawkins' body lay, justice finally served. The surviving hired guns had fled into the night, carrying with them a story that would spread throughout the territories. It wasn't just about a man who could command wolves, but about a different kind of justice, one that came on silent pause and answered cruelty with calculated retribution. Luna approached Emily cautiously, drawn by the girl's complete lack of fear. The young wolf's special talent told her that this child had been changed by her experience, but not broken. Emily reached out slowly and touched Luna's fur, a smile of pure wonder on her face. "They protected me," she told her father. "When the bad men tried to run, the big one, Thunder, he stood over me, kept me safe until the others were dealt with." Sarah moved through the scene, checking for injuries and offering comfort where needed. She paused beside Blackwood, noting how his wolves had positioned themselves around the town, still alert for any remaining threats. "Your ranch," she said softly. "Everything you built can be rebuilt," he finished. "What matters is family." His gaze took in not just his wolves, but Sarah, Emily, and even the repentant sheriff. All kinds of family, Ghost and Timber, returned from their final sweep of the area, confirming through their signals that no enemies remained within miles of Millbrook. The threat that had loomed over the town was gone, washed away by rain and wolf's teeth. The town's people began emerging from their homes, drawn by the morning light and the absence of gunfire. They found not the scene of horror they expected, but something more complex, a new understanding of what it meant to have a pack of wolves as their protectors. "What happens now?" Parker asked, still holding his daughter close. Blackwood looked at his wolves, each one alert and ready despite their exhaustion. Now we rebuild, not just structures, but trust, community. Shadow pressed against his leg, and Blackwood smiled. And we remember that sometimes the strongest bonds aren't the ones we're born with, but the ones we choose to forge. The morning sun cast long shadows as Blackwood and his pack prepared to return to their territory. They had eliminated not just a gang, but a legacy of cruelty that had plagued the frontier. In its place, they had demonstrated a different kind of strength, one based on loyalty, justice, and the unshakable bonds between species. Emily waved goodbye to the wolves, understanding somehow that while she might not see them often, they would always be watching, always protecting. The pack disappeared into the morning mist like spirits, leaving behind a town forever changed by their night of justice. As they traveled home, Blackwood reflected on how his years of tragedy and loss had led to this moment. His wife's death had set him on this path, but what had started as a quest for vengeance had transformed into something greater, a mission to protect, to serve justice, to forge a family that transcended the boundaries between man and wolf. The pack moved through the wilderness with their characteristic grace, their mission complete but their vigilance never-ending. They were more than just trained animals now. They were living proof that justice could wear many forms, and that the strongest pack was one bound by choice, trust, and love. Spring came to Millbrook Valley, painting the wilderness in shades of rebirth. On the ridge where Blackwood's burnt ranch had stood, a new structure rose against the sky. The townspeople had come together to help rebuild, paying back the debt they owed to the man and wolves who had protected them when darkness fell. Shadow stood at Blackwood's side as they surveyed the work. The alpha wolf had grown even more protective since the night of battle, understanding that their territory now extended beyond the wilderness to include the town itself. The other wolves patrolled in pairs, Thunder and Luna checking the northern boundaries, Ghost and Storm securing the south, while Timber ranged ahead, forever testing the wind for new threats. "The pack's different now," Sarah observed, joining them on the ridge. She'd officially moved her medical practice to a new building near Blackwood's ranch, understanding that her place was with this unusual family. They carry themselves like guardians, not just hunters. Blackwood nodded, watching Emily Parker approach up the trail. The girl visited regularly, drawn to the wolves who had saved her. Luna especially had formed a bond with the child, seeming to understand that her presence helped heal old wounds in both human and wolf hearts. "They chose this," Blackwood said quietly, "just like I chose them, just like you chose to stay." The valley spread out below them, peaceful now, but forever changed. The story of the wolf pack's justice had spread throughout the territories, becoming something of a legend. Those with evil intentions learned to avoid Millbrook, while those seeking protection sometimes made the journey just to catch a glimpse of the wolves who had become more than mere animals. In town, Sheriff Parker had pinned a deputy's badge on Blackwood, a gesture that meant little to the man, but acknowledged a deeper truth. Law and justice could take many forms, and sometimes the most effective guardians were those who walked the boundary between two worlds. As the sun set on another day, the pack gathered around their rebuilt home. They were more than just trained hunters now, more than even a family. They had become living proof that when trust, loyalty, and love bridged the gap between species, something extraordinary emerged. The wolves raised their voices in a howl that echoed through the valley. Not a battle cry or a hunting call, but a declaration. This was their home, their territory, their people to protect. And any who thought to test that commitment would learn what the Hawkins gang had discovered too. Late in this valley, justice had teeth.